It happened again. A thunderous crunch shattered the morning quiet, followed by the screech of tires ripping down the street. My mug slipped from my hand, coffee splashing across the floor as I sprinted for the door. I already knew what I'd find before I saw it. My poor mailbox lay face down in a bed of crushed tulips, splintered, mangled, and smoking like a crime scene. The wood was cracked in half. One of the screws still glowed faintly from friction. The smell of burnt paint and rubber hung in the air. A black streak of tire rubber stretched diagonally across my lawn, a signature left by the same culprits who'd been tormenting me for months. I looked up just in time to catch a glimpse of their white SUV tearing off down the street, the Queen Barge, as they proudly called it. Behind the wheel, Nancy's round face was twisted in laughter. Beside her, Barbara was holding up her phone, filming it like it was an episode of some trashy prank show. They didn't even try to hide anymore. That was the third time in 2 months. When the twins moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, things went downhill fast. They were impossible to ignore, two florally dressed hurricanes of entitlement, identical in every inconvenient way. Loud, obnoxious, and always sweating, they filled the air with perfume that smelled like melted cherries and sunscreen. Their laughter echoed across the block, their SUV blocked driveways, and their voices carried through walls. The first accident had been minor. A light bump, they said, with fake sympathy and plastic smiles. I fixed the damage myself, no complaints. Everyone deserves one mistake, right? The second time wasn't subtle. They plowed through it like demolition derby contestants and didn't stop. When I asked about it, Barbara laughed. Maybe don't put it so close to the road, she said, sipping a Diet Coke. That's where mailboxes go, I replied. She smirked. Well, maybe if it was prettier, I'd try not to hit it. Ugly things are hard to see. That's who they were, queens of mockery. And somehow, everyone let them get away with it. The HOA said, we'll look into it. The police said, unless you have proof, it's a civil matter. So I fixed it again. And again. But with every nail I drove into that post, the anger in my chest grew heavier. I watched them parade their SUV like royalty, waving at neighbors they terrorized, calling the HOA on anyone who annoyed them. They even accused my elderly neighbor of threatening them because he asked them to turn down their music. I stood at the edge of my lawn that morning, fists tight, staring at the mess. The tulips I'd planted in spring were crushed under splintered wood and torn metal. My street number plate was bent in half. I could almost hear them laughing still, two overgrown children in matching dresses, drunk on their own chaos. I went back inside, sat in silence, and stared out the window. The sun was just rising, casting soft light over the destruction. I wasn't even angry anymore, just tired. Tired of fixing what they destroyed. Tired of being the quiet one while everyone else looked away. That night, I replayed the morning in my mind again and again, until one thought stuck, a thought that felt colder, heavier, but right. If they were going to keep playing bumper cars with my property, then maybe it was time to stop being the target. Because people like Nancy and Barbara only understand consequences, not kindness. I glanced toward the dark street outside my window, the ruined mailbox still lying there like a fallen soldier. They wanted war, I muttered to myself. Fine. War it is. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Not revenge. Not violence. Just something simple, something that would end this once and for all. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, scrolling through forums until I found what I needed, a whole underground community of people who'd had their mailboxes destroyed by reckless drivers. Farmers, veterans, rural homeowners, all with the same story, all tired of rebuilding. And they all had the same solution, make the mailbox indestructible. There were photos and videos, mailboxes built like tanks. Steel posts buried in concrete. Reinforced boxes that could turn a pickup bumper into scrap metal. One photo showed a dented truck wrapped around a shiny black mailbox with the caption, they hit me once. Never again. That was it. That was the spark. I cleared out my garage that afternoon and got to work like a man possessed. I pulled on a pair of gloves, grabbed my old tools, and started drawing plans. This wasn't going to be just a mailbox, it was going to be a monument. Something solid, permanent, a silent middle finger to anyone who thought they could keep pushing me around. I went down to the local salvage yard and spent hours digging through piles of scrap metal. The air smelled like oil and dust. A man behind the counter looked up when I asked for steel pipes. "What are you building?" he asked. "Something that'll outlive me," I said. He laughed. "If you want it to stop cars, fill it with rebar, weld it tight, and bury it in 200 pounds of concrete. Ain't nobody walking away clean after that." Perfect. That night, sparks lit the garage. The sound of the welder crackled like thunder. I cut, shaped, and sealed the steel pipe, 4 inches thick, 6 feet long, half of it to be buried deep in the earth. I packed it with sand and rebar, welded it shut, and drilled it into a square metal base. The thing was heavy, more than 200 pounds, but I didn't stop. Sweat ran down my arms, the air thick with smoke and effort. By midnight, I was outside under the pale moonlight, digging into the ground where the old mailbox once stood. The night was silent except for the scrape of my shovel and the hum of crickets. Every swing felt like releasing a week's worth of anger. I poured the concrete, lowered the steel post in, and leveled it perfectly. When I finally stepped back, covered in sweat and dust, I felt calm. The next morning, it stood proudly at the edge of my lawn, sleek, black, ordinary looking from the outside. No one would guess it was armor-plated steel bolted to a concrete fortress beneath the soil. The perfect trap. At around 9, I saw them. Nancy and Barbara. Matching floral dresses again, this time, purple with daisies. They stepped out of their house, squinting toward my yard. Barbara raised her phone, filming. "He put up another one," she said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Nancy shielded her eyes. "Ugh, it's hideous. You think it'll last a week?" Barbara asked with a laugh. Nancy smirked. "Try an hour." They giggled as they got into their SUV, the Queen barge gleaming under the sunlight. I didn't move. I just stood behind my curtains, watching them drive off. My pulse was steady. My expression calm. Let them think they'd won before. Let them think this one's just another victim. Because this time, it wasn't wood and nails. It was steel and patience. Days passed. Then a week. Still nothing. The Queen barge rolled past a few times, but never slowed. Maybe they were thinking. Maybe they were plotting. Or maybe they could feel it, the quiet confidence of something waiting for them. Sometimes, when the street fell silent at night, I'd stand by the window, looking out at that black box glinting softly under the streetlight. They'd taken my peace before. But not anymore. Because this time, the trap was set. And all I had to do, was wait. It was a Saturday night, calm, too calm. The kind of night when even the streetlights hum louder than the wind. I was in the living room, half asleep on the couch, when I heard it, the low, throaty rumble of an engine outside. I sat up slowly. That sound, I knew it. The Queen barge. I slipped to the window, careful not to move the curtain too much. Through the gap, I saw it creeping down the street, headlights dimmed, 2 silhouettes in the front. Nancy in the driver's seat. Barbara beside her, phone in hand, recording like always. They stopped right in front of my yard. Nancy rolled down the window. I could almost see her smile, that smug, thin-lipped smirk that had haunted me for months. Then she revved the engine. Barbara giggled. This time, let's really teach him a lesson. The tires squealed. The SUV lunged forward, straight into the mailbox. The sound that followed wasn't wood splintering this time. It was metal meeting steel. A deep, violent crack echoed down the street, followed by the shattering of glass, the screech of twisting metal, and one sharp scream. The entire front end of the SUV crumpled like paper. The hood folded upward, steam hissing from the radiator. The airbag exploded with a white flash inside the cab. The car rolled back, its bumper hanging loose, headlights shattered, the Queen barge was dead in the water. For a few seconds, everything was still. Just the hiss of coolant, the faint buzz of a dying engine. I stepped out of my house. Calm. Barefoot. The night air cool against my skin. Nancy sat behind the wheel, dazed, her hands gripping the deflated airbag. Barbara's phone was still recording, but it had fallen into her lap. You did this on purpose." Nancy gasped, trying to open the door. It was bent shut. I looked at the mailbox, not a single scratch. Standing perfectly straight, proud and silent in the moonlight. "I just built it to last," I said softly. She screamed something, maybe a curse, maybe a name, but I didn't listen. The neighbors were already coming out, phones flashing, murmurs rising. "Call the police," someone shouted. I stood there as the flashing red and blue lights washed over my house, reflecting off the steel box like it was smiling. When the officer approached, he squinted at the wreck, then at the mailbox. "That thing's solid steel." "Just protecting my property," I said. He nodded slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Nancy's face twisted with rage. "He's lying. He wanted this to happen." But the officer only sighed. "Ma'am, you drove onto his lawn and hit his mailbox. You're lucky you're not hurt worse." Barbara's video went viral that same week, millions of views. HOA Queen crashes into indestructible mailbox. The comments were merciless. Some called it karma. Others called it art. Me? I called it peace. Because after that night, the street was quiet again. No phone calls. No letters. No gossip. Just the sound of wind through the trees, and one unbreakable mailbox standing guard at the edge of my yard, a monument not to revenge, but to patience. And every morning when I pass it, I whisper the same 3 words to myself. Never again, Nancy. Weeks passed, and the story became something of a legend on our little street. The whispers faded, but the stares didn't. Some neighbors avoided eye contact altogether, fumbling with their trash cans or pretending to check their phones when I passed. Others gave me a small nod, that quiet, knowing kind of nod men give when they secretly wish they'd stood up too. The HOA stopped sending letters. No more warnings, no more friendly reminders. The gossip chain died slow, like a fire running out of oxygen. Even Nancy's perfect white fence, once spotless, almost glowing, stayed a little cracked now, its paint flaking under the summer sun. A reminder that she wasn't untouchable after all. Her SUV sat in her driveway for days after the crash, the front end crumpled and tied shut with rope. Every morning I'd see her standing by it in her robe, coffee mug trembling slightly in her hand, eyes hollow. Eventually, it was gone, towed away one morning before dawn. Like a fallen crown quietly carried off the battlefield. The days turned long and strangely calm. But something about the quiet didn't sit right with me. It wasn't peace, it was silence waiting for something to happen. One evening, as the sun dipped low and spilled gold across the houses, I stepped out to get the mail. The air smelled of cut grass and grilled burgers, kids laughed down the block, chasing a ball between driveways. For the first time in weeks, everything felt normal again. Until I opened the mailbox. Inside, folded neatly atop a small stack of envelopes, was a note. No envelope, no name, just a torn sheet of floral stationery that carried a faint, sweet smell of perfume. The kind that lingered too long. It read. "You think you've won. But this isn't over. No signature. But I didn't need one. I looked up slowly. Across the street, behind lace curtains, Nancy was standing there, perfectly still, her silhouette framed by the dying light. Hands clasped, eyes cold. Watching. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The street was silent except for the distant hum of a lawnmower. Then she smiled, a small, brittle curve of her lips, and pulled the curtain shut. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of realization. People like Nancy didn't understand peace. They didn't know how to live without control, without conflict. Without someone to aim their unhappiness at. And maybe, I thought, that was her punishment, to live inside that restlessness, alone. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. The next morning, under a pale blue sky, I crossed the street and walked straight to her front door. The neighborhood was still, curtains shifted slightly as people peeked from behind them. I could feel the eyes. I knocked. A moment later, the door opened. Nancy stood there, as immaculate as ever. Perfect hair. Pearls around her neck. That same smile, polished, practiced, but trembling at the edges. "Morning," I said quietly. "Got your note?" Her eyes flickered, just once. "I don't know what you mean," she said, voice flat. I nodded. "You do. But it doesn't matter. I'm not here to argue." She crossed her arms, defensive. "Then what are you here for?" I looked past her, at the tidy hallway, the framed family portraits, the faint smell of lavender and tension, and said, "To tell you I forgive you." For the first time, she blinked. Her expression broke. "Excuse me. I built that mailbox to protect myself, not to hurt you," I said. "And it worked. I don't need to fight you anymore. You can stay angry if you want, or you can stop. Your choice." The wind stirred the flowers on her porch. For a long second, she just stood there, silent, the way someone looks when their entire world stops making sense. I turned and started walking back down her driveway. Gravel crunched under my shoes. Behind me, her voice cracked through the quiet, small, unsteady. "Why would you forgive me?" I stopped and looked back once. Her eyes were wet now, not angry, just tired. "Because," I said, "you already punished yourself more than I ever could." She didn't reply. Just stood there, frozen in her doorway, the morning light spilling around her like the truth she'd spent years avoiding. I walked home in silence. That evening, as the sun sank behind the houses, the street felt different, still quiet, but not heavy anymore. Just calm. Peaceful. I sat by my window, watching the moonlight glide across the smooth steel of my mailbox. For months it had felt like armor, a symbol of defiance. But tonight, it looked different, softer somehow. It didn't feel like a weapon anymore. It felt like a promise. That some battles aren't won by fighting harder, they end when you choose to stop fighting at all. And maybe, I thought, that's what real strength looks like. Not victory. But letting go. Would you like me to make this version even more cinematic and visual, film-style narration, next, like how it would play scene by scene in a dramatic short film or YouTube story narration? A few months passed. Seasons changed, summer melted into fall, the air turning crisp, leaves swirling across the street like soft embers. My lawn grew wild again, and I let it. The HOA had stopped caring. Or maybe they just stopped trying. One morning, as I was tightening the hinges on my front gate, I noticed movement across the street. Nancy, but not the Nancy I remembered. Her perfect hair was gone, replaced with a short, uneven cut. Her face looked thinner, older somehow. No pearls, no clipboard, no camera. She was kneeling by her mailbox, trying to fix its crooked post. The once pristine white box was rusted, paint peeling. I watched her struggle, the wrench slipping from her hand again and again. A month ago, I would have turned away. But something in me, maybe that same peace I'd fought for, wouldn't let me. I crossed the street. She noticed my shadow and froze. For a second, I saw the old Nancy flash in her eyes, proud, defensive. But it faded just as quickly. "You need a hand?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "It's heavier than I thought." I took the wrench, straightened the post, tightened the bolts until it stood firm. She watched silently, hands clasped in front of her. When I was done, she said quietly, "I never said thank you. For that night, for not pressing charges." I shrugged. "Didn't need to. Life handled it." She gave a small, broken laugh. "Yeah, it did." We stood there in the golden morning light, two people who'd spent months tearing each other apart, now just neighbors, tired, older, human. I started to walk back when she said, "You know. I sold the SUV. Got something smaller." I smiled. "Good idea." "Yeah," she said softly. "Guess I finally learned that not everything needs to be bigger to be stronger." I nodded once. That's true for people, too. When I got back home, I paused by my mailbox, that unshakable slab of steel still standing proud, the paint now a little faded, but still perfect. For the first time, I reached out and rested my hand on it. It felt warm from the morning sun. That mailbox had been built from anger, born out of frustration, defiance, and exhaustion. But now it stood as something else entirely, a reminder. That strength doesn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes, it means surviving long enough to forgive. As I turned to head inside, I saw Nancy wave, small, hesitant, but real. I waved back. And just like that, the war that once defined our little street was over. All that remained was a quiet peace, and one mailbox, built to last, standing as a monument not to revenge, but to redemption.